Everybody, my name is James Nugent, also known as Jimmy Nugent around here, and it's a really huge honor for me to be able to chair this fantastic meeting. We have a lot of very distinguished guests here today, and I'm going to let you hear them very shortly. And we're going to have a more formal welcome from the mayor in one moment, but I do want to just start this meeting, as we do a lot of meetings, with a land acknowledgement. So we would like to acknowledge that today's meeting takes place on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Wendat, which is governed by the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, Treaty Number 16, and the Williams Treaties, which continue to give us all rights and responsibilities and obligations with respect to this land and one another. So I'm just going to give a very quick, brief overview of the agenda before Mayor Bill French comes up. We're going to have Mayor Bill French introduce the politicians who are here today and our distinguished guests. I'm going to then come back up and I'm going to introduce the speakers. We'll have the speakers speak. And then we're going to have the politicians also have an opportunity to speak and reflect on what's been said. We're going to have a Q&A to hopefully get everybody who's here, who's participating, and who we're happy to have come out with a Q&A, a question and answer, a few reminders, some thank yous, and then some refreshments. So I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Bill French to welcome us here.
I'm a little more vertically challenged. Good afternoon, I'm Bill French, and I'm proud to be the Mayor of Springwater. And it is my privilege to be here and bring greetings on behalf of all those gathered here, on behalf of the Township of Springwater. And I do want to acknowledge Deputy Mayor Allen, who is at the table here, Warden Jerry Marshall. Maybe you wave your hand, Jerry. And I see we have obviously Tiny Mayor George Cornell. And we have MP Alex Nuttall, of course, over here. We have MP Bruce Stanton. And I do want to pass on my regrets from local councillor Katie Austin. She couldn't be here. She had a family matter to attend to. I just want to say the Spring family has been an important part of our rural fabric for many years. We are gathered as family members, neighbors, friends, community groups, and members of the many faith families in Springwater. Our rural nature makes us at times more aware and engaged when something happens with a neighbor. A few weeks ago, Janet requested that I forward written letters to MP Nuttall and MPP Wilson seeking their assistance, which I was pleased to do. So today we are here to become better informed by our presenters and to find possible ways of assisting Karen in her fight for the freedom of her partner Edwin Espinal and other falsely imprisoned political prisoners in Honduras. When you have a chance, I see the blue chart on the back there actually has a list of those political prisoners. So I'm certainly excited about hearing the presenters today, and hopefully kind of all of us can reflect on it and see what we can do to assist our local family in kind of resolving this matter, which obviously is quite serious. So thank you for coming, and God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bill French. So I'm going to introduce the speakers, and I'm not sure if, is Jeff Montague here? So he might be joining us later. Jeff Montague Milligan is the former chief of Beausoleil First Nations, and he's a teacher and author and a musician as well. So we hope that he'll be able to join with us today. But first we're going to hear from Dr. Tyler Shipley, who teaches at York University in International Studies and Humber College School of Liberal Arts and Sciences. He's an expert on Canadian-Honduran relations and author of a new book, Canada and Empire, Canada and the Military Coup in Honduras, and it's actually for sale at the back. And so if you want to find out more about that, what he said today, there's a lot more in-depth reading at the back. I'm a lecturer, so I love assigning people readings. Karen Spring is, of course, well known in this community, and she's here on behalf of the Honduras Solidarity Network, she'll be speaking on behalf of the Honduran political prisoners and their families. Janet Spring, of course, is also very well known in this community, and she'll be talking about what kind of actions we can take going forward from today. So I'd like to turn the mic over first to Dr. Tyler Shipley.
Thank you so much for inviting me here, Janet, Karen, everybody connected with all this. It's my first time up to Elmvale. I drove up from Toronto. I'm so sorry that I'm a Toronto guy, but I'm from Winnipeg originally, so my roots are rural Manitoba, as a matter of fact. So my roots are much more rural than it may appear, and I'm really, really honored to be here with you all today. I won't take too long. I've got my phone here so that I stay on time. I'm going to be less than 10 minutes. I'm also a lecturer. We can drone on, believe me. Just ask my students. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to be clear and succinct and brief, if I can, in talking to you today about some of the background, the backstory to the very upsetting personal and immediate concern around the safety of Edwin, who has become a member of the family for Karen and Janet, and in a way, by extension, for all of you in this community. Edwin has been a great friend of mine. When I have gone to Honduras over many years to do the research that informs this book, I've often stayed with Karen and Edwin. I'm a big Canucks fan, Vancouver Canucks fan, and I introduced Edwin to the Canucks many years ago. He didn't like it, he prefers soccer. I don't blame him. But this is very personal for me as much as anyone, and maybe not as much as Karen, but certainly I share many of the personal connections to Edwin that I think make this such an important moment for us as Canadians to hold ourselves accountable. And that's what I want to talk about today in the time that I have. I want to talk about how we hold ourselves accountable as Canadians for what has happened in Honduras, which may sound odd, because what on earth does Canada have to do with what's happening in Honduras? And so I brought my book, because my book explains it in great detail. I don't expect you to rush to the back and buy the book, but I hope that my having the book here will help you to trust me that when I say Canada has played a huge role in the crisis in Honduras, I mean that Canada has played 220 pages worth of a role in what is happening in Honduras right now. I want to take you back to where this story, I think, really begins, which is in 2009, when the Honduran military takes it upon itself to kidnap the president of Honduras, the elected, democratic president of Honduras, and kidnap him up from his home. He's in his pajamas. They take him to a helicopter. They fly him out of the country. This is where the crisis in Honduras starts. And I know many of you probably don't know much about Central American politics and how it all goes. It can all sound a little crazy at times in the way that it's presented, but I assure you, it's not normal for a president to be kidnapped, first thing in the morning from his home and flown out of the country. I'm sure there's many people in this room who have a variety of opinions about Justin Trudeau, but I don't think any of us would be pleased if the Canadian military kidnapped him from his home, Sussex Drive, I think, and flew him out of the country and took martial control. I think a lot of us would be upset, no matter what our political background. And Edwin was one of those Hondurans who was upset at the sight of the democratically elected president being kidnapped and taken out of the country. Edwin, like so many people, hundreds of thousands, millions actually, of Hondurans, protested against the kidnapping of their president, the kidnapping of their democracy. Because really, in the time since 2009, there has not been one single free, fair election. There have been 3 deeply problematic, deeply flawed, the last one irrevocably fraudulent. So many Hondurans shared Edwin's perspective that there was a problem in the kidnapping of the president, and they began protesting, they began demanding a return to democracy, and they were met with violence. They were met with tear gas, they were met with armored vehicles, they were sometimes shot at. Many people have been killed over the last 8.5, almost 9 years now, or longer than that, perhaps, lose track of time. And the surprising thing, and this is what I want to really focus on today, the surprising bit is that Canada, throughout this process, has taken the side of the Honduran military. In the day that the coup happened, it was really, really interesting to watch how things all played out. It happened first thing in the morning, and every government around the world, especially in the Western Hemisphere, immediately issued statements saying You can't do this. This is totally unacceptable. We condemn what has happened. Bring back the president. Throw these people in jail. How dare they kidnap a president? This is absurd. And Canada waited and waited and waited. I'm talking like 12 hours. And again, this is not in the middle of the night, and it wasn't everyone was sleeping. This is in the middle of the day. The news, it's a 24-hour news cycle. Everybody knows what's going on. 12 hours later, Canada finally issues a statement, and it was very Canadian. I think you'll understand what I mean by that. The statement essentially said, Canada calls on all parties to show restraint. Which is an odd statement, right? I mean, if you don't know anything about Honduras, it sounds great. It sounds like something every one of us in this room would agree with, right? Hey, everybody just sit back, play it cool, show restraint, don't do anything crazy, don't be violent, don't get upset, try to, cooler heads must prevail. That all sounds perfectly fine. And I think it fits with what a lot of us imagine we are as Canadians. But the context was that the military had kidnapped the president and flown him out of the country, and they had enforced martial law. They were literally shooting people in the streets. Dozens of people were killed in the first few days. So in that context, for Canada to say we would call on all parties to show restraint was a very, very odd kind of statement. And if, at first you think, well, maybe Canada just wasn't fully informed, didn't have enough information yet, maybe a few days later and in the weeks, that went on, as the truth became clear, Canada would take a better position. And unfortunately, that's not what happened. Canada consistently sided with the military government. Canada increasingly criticized the former president who had been kidnapped and taken out of the country. He's not above criticism. Again, I've got a few criticisms of Justin Trudeau, but that doesn't mean that he should be kidnapped. That doesn't mean that the government should be overthrown. And yet Canada consistently criticized the former president and suggested that maybe the coup needed to happen. Maybe it was better. Maybe this is a step in the right direction. And in any event, we're going to just let things play out as they will. The reason I highlight all this is that because Canada had an opportunity 9 years ago to take a strong stand, to defend human rights, which were under attack, to defend democracy, which was under attack, and it didn't. It passed up that opportunity, and instead, Canada built a stronger relationship with that military government of Honduras. Again, I know this all sounds surprising, but it's perhaps less surprising if you know that a lot of Canadian capital is invested in Honduras. In the mining sector, maybe no surprise, in manufacturing, in the tourist industry. There is a lot of Canadian capital invested in Honduras, and unfortunately the Canadian government decided it was more important to support those interests, which did benefit from the coup. They did benefit from a strong military government that would crack down on protest, that would crack down on trade unions, that would break feminist organizations, that would attack indigenous organizations. That all was good for Canadian businesses that were operating in Honduras. Unfortunately, that is often how these things work. And so the Canadian government did well by Goldcorp, Barrick Gold, Gildan, Alba Minerals, all of these Canadian companies that have extracted more profit from Honduras in this period. But unfortunately, it's had a disastrous effect on the country, on the people who live there. And Edwin is one of, not dozens, not hundreds, not even thousands, but tens of thousands of people who've been arrested, detained, attacked, beaten, who've been subject to violence, sexual violence. Many have been killed, many have been tortured. The situation has devolved into a full-blown dictatorship.
So now I'd like to invite up Karen Spring to speak about, on behalf of the political prisoners in Honduras.
Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, I just really want to thank everybody for being here. It means a lot to see so many people from the community where I grew up and my family for coming from so many different parts to be here with us. And I just want to thank so much too for all the people that, like from the community of Elmvale, from Simcoe County, that have supported my mom and my family and that have made this event possible. And so thank you very much as well. There's so many people, and so I'm not going to begin with names, but I think there's a lot of people that know who they are. My name is Karen Spring, and I thought I would maybe tell you a little bit about why I grew up in Elmvale. I went to school here, my elementary school, my high school years were all spent here. And so what led me to go to Honduras and what I've been doing in Honduras for the last 9 years. And then I'll talk a little bit about the most recent elections in Honduras and sort of what happened on the ground in Honduras and what I was doing there, and then talk more about the situation with Edwin and the political prisoners in the country. So basically, I'm the Honduras-based coordinator for a large network of organizations from Canada and the United States that's called the Honduras Solidarity Network. We formed after the 2009 coup that Tyler talked extensively about, because we were concerned about the role that the US and the Canadian government were playing in the country. We felt they were taking the wrong position. And so we formed to begin looking and investigating at the role that our governments were playing in Honduras. So I showed up in Honduras. I was in Guatemala previously working with a small Canadian and US-based organization called Rights Action. And actually Graham Russell is at the back from Rights Action, and he's been extensively supporting me and knows a lot about the situation in the country as well. So I went to Honduras a couple weeks after the military coup to basically accompany the Honduran people as they were protesting in the streets, and then also trying to put information out about what was going on there, what were Hondurans telling me, what was I seeing with my own eyes. And then over the years, I've sort of focused more on working with indigenous organizations and groups and communities in Honduras, helping them document the role that Canadian mining companies are playing in the country, Honduran women, the impacts that they have on their health when they're working on the assembly lines of Canadian-owned sweatshop companies. And so a lot of my work in Honduras has to do with documenting, so interviewing people, understanding what's going on, getting that information out, and then also always remembering how do I fit into this as a Canadian? You know, what is my role in Honduras? What is the role of our governments in Honduras, and how can we make things better there? So basically, the most recent elections, as Tyler sort of touched on, sort of everything that's been happening in Honduras is really, you can't look at it without, like what Tyler already said, without looking at our role that we played in supporting the 2009 military coup. The country sort of began spiraling after that coup. The more time I've spent in Honduras, I've been living and working there for 9 years, the more I've seen it spiral and spiral, and the more I've seen Canada take the wrong position every time. And these past and most recent elections that were in November of last year, the current president decided to run for re-election, even though it's totally a violation of the Constitution. And I know that it's really difficult for Canadians to understand sort of the context in Honduras, but there's no rule of law in that country. So there's no, people make things up. When they want to criminalize people, they make it up. When they want to do an investigation into into a murder, you know, they don't follow the procedures, the correct procedures that are written in the law. It's sort of there's no rule of law, there's no due process. And I think it's really hard for Canadians to understand that. And it's really fundamental to understand that when you're talking about Honduran law, when you're talking about why political prisoners are in jail, they're there for political reasons. They're not there because there's a functioning justice system that has found them guilty and that they've done something wrong. And so these most recent elections, the president ran for re-election. And immediately, when the president realized he was losing by 5 percentage points in the polls, that's when the computer system crashed and it went down. And slowly, over a period of a week, the presidents in power now started gaining ground and started winning. And so Hondurans, like Edwin, and all the political prisoners, and thousands, millions of Hondurans went to the streets once again to defend their vote. And I think that's what we all would do here if a similar thing happened here to us. And so they went to the streets and they protested. They were demanding that their votes be respected. They were demanding that the president step down, that they stop supporting like a fraudulent counting process, because it was very clear what was going on. And the Honduran government responded by shooting protesters blatantly in the streets. They would tear gas us. I was in many protests where we were being tear gassed. And beaten, very badly beaten, if they were caught, thrown in jail. There's just countless violations that were being committed. And then they also, what they did is they put a military curfew in place. And so for about 10 days, we weren't allowed to go out of our house from 6 o'clock in the afternoon until 6 a.m. the following day. And you can imagine what that would mean for you. You wouldn't be able to go to the gym after finishing work. You wouldn't be able to go to the hospital if you had an emergency. And if you did, then you risked being arrested, you risked being shot at. It was a complete suspension of constitutional rights. And so that's what Hondurans were living in. And I was there in that period of time. And it was terror. I mean, the streets were bare and everyone was scared, and you wake up the next morning to news about what had happened the night before. And once again, a report of all these violations. And so it was a really difficult time in Honduras since November. And in around late December, shortly before Christmas, the United States government recognized the elections. They ignored the widespread allegations of fraud that many institutions, international institutions and human rights organizations raised serious concern about. And then within a day, the Canadian government recognized the elections as well. And before and after Canada's recognition of the election results, there were people being shot in the streets. It's not like the Canadian government did not know what was going on. They knew very well that there was a suspension of constitutional rights. They knew that press were being thrown in jail, being killed. These were things that were very well documented. And so that's sort of that's sort of the context, to set the context in which Edwin's arrest happened. So basically, Hondurans stayed in the street. Despite everything, they decided to stay in the streets, as they always have since the military coup, basically, trying to get their country back on track like they wanted. And they stayed on the streets protesting, as did Edwin and all the political prisoners. And the list of political prisoners is at the back, and there's some pictures of some of the political prisoners that are, most of them are being held in maximum security prisons in the country. But basically, they're all protesters, and they're all people that went into the streets to defend their vote. They were all arrested at different times, and some of them are in different conditions than others in Honduras, but basically, I can speak better about Edwin's specific circumstances, but the majority of all the political prisoners are being held in maximum security prisons that are run by the military. And so in the case of where, in the jail Edwin is being held in, the conditions are horrific. Both the conditions of his legal case, but also the conditions, like the physical conditions in which he is being detained in. And so I don't want to get too much into detail, and we can leave some time for discussion afterwards, but basically, the prisons and the conditions they're being held in are seen as a punishment in the country. The government has decided to throw them in jail to make an example of the rest of the Hondurans that went to the streets to terrorize, as an effort to terrorize the population and use the political prisoners as a way to say, if you protest, if you speak out against us, we will throw you in jail in a maximum security prison as well. And I think what's really important as well is that there were over 35 people that were murdered in the streets by state security forces. They were shot at as they were running away, or as they were passing by a protest, or they were actually participating in a protest, peaceful protests. And the government, the UN High Commissioner's Office, the United Nations has said that, has confirmed that this is true. So we're not making this up. This is not something that is not well known. And the Honduran government has not investigated or held anyone responsible for any of those murders. the people that, the police and the military that shot the protesters are free and have guns and are still patrolling the streets. But they've decided to throw 22 political prisoners in jail and use all the might of the public prosecutor's office, of the judicial system, to throw them in jail and keep them in jail, and to deny them any sort of due process. And so I think it's really important for us, and I think Tyler did a really good job at sort of highlighting this, is that because Canada recognized the government and ignored all of the human rights issues, we play a huge role in what's going on there. And so Edwin is largely detained, and the political prisoners are detained because of the recognition that our government and other foreign governments have given to the government of Honduras. And I think that we, especially Simcoe County and everything that the folks have already done here, has made a tremendous impact on the Canadian government's response. And maybe my mom will go more into those, into detail, but I think that we've gotten it wrong on Honduras. I think we need to change our policy significantly there, and I think that we and everyone in this room can play a huge role in demanding that our government basically uphold basic human rights standards and basic human rights principles that we would expect ourselves here. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm sure I'm leaving a lot of information out, but there's time for discussion afterwards, and then I'm going to pass it to my mom to explain a little bit about what we can do.
Thank you, Karen, and we'll now hear from James.
Thank you very much for everyone here to come out to our meeting. We really, really appreciate all of the help that you have given us so far, and it has really made a big difference. We have made small gains, but hopefully this big difference will continue. I'd like to thank all of the people who have been working here with us. We have done so much in 2 months. We have a committee called the Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor, and that support spans not only the community of Elmvale, Springwater, the county of Simcoe, but it is throughout Ontario and Canada, and we've even had some support from the US, Australia, and Europe. And Karen and Edwin have been involved in the work with many different organizations throughout the world, and we've had a wonderful supportive response from them all. The international organizations have also come on board. We've had a great amount of support from the International Red Cross, and I'll go into that in a minute, and other organizations. But I think what's really, really important comes from our grassroots, and that comes from our local MPs. We really thank all the work that Alex Nuttall has been doing in support of our cause. And Bruce Stanton has been amazing. He has taken our issue and brought it forward. He has been speaking with officials at Chrystia Freeland's office, at the Office of Global Affairs Canada. And that support has really, really helped, because in a conversation with James Hill, the ambassador to Canada, 2 weeks ago, he did mention the fact that we've had an awful lot of support from our Elmvale community. And this is an ambassador that is sitting in Costa Rica, and he is telling me this. So I thank you all so, so much. But of course, that support that the Canadian ambassador to Honduras has also is from this pressure that we have been giving to the Liberal government of Canada. And so we are asking that our campaign continue and to get stronger and continue the pressure on the Canadian government, on Chrystia Freeland's office, on Justin Trudeau, on Sophie Trudeau, and bring these human rights issues forward, And I think that we can do so from our small rural community, because in conversation with Christa Freeland's office, Canada, when Karen and Graham Russell were in a meeting 2 weeks ago, they also mentioned that our rural community they had heard from. And so we have this support here that, that they know about. So, today we would ask you to take further action, and we are asking for you to write to your MP and demand that they call for the government of Canada, under the leadership of Justin Trudeau, to stand by its stated position in support of human rights and the rule of law in Honduras. And your local member of parliament, of course, we're very, very fortunate because they have been doing so. But I know that many of you have come from afar, come from Toronto and further, and continue to ask your MP to move forward with our demands to free these political prisoners. We also have an open letter to the government that we are asking you to sign, and they are at the back table. And as a citizen of the county of Simcoe, we are asking you to sign, and we will send these letters, mail them to Christa Freeland's office at Global Affairs Canada. And I and Karen have a meeting with Global Affairs on Tuesday, and we are going to be taking some of these letters as well. I also have a meeting with Sofia Serrato Rodriguez, who is the Honduran ambassador to Canada. And I'm also going to be taking the Spanish version of the letter that we are going to be mailing out to Honduran authorities. And we are asking you to sign that as well. So I'm going to read this letter quickly, just so that you know what it says, because it's just in case you don't have the time. And Karen has it written in Spanish as well. And this is what it says. We are a group of concerned Canadian and U.S. citizens who are closely monitoring the situation of Edwin Robelo Espinal and the additional 19 other political prisoners and the human rights violations in Honduras in the context of the post-electoral crisis. We are aware of several violations being committed by the Honduran state, as mentioned in the UN High Commissioner's report published on March the 12th, 2018, and would like to highlight the following concerns about the abuses being committed against the political prisoners. The political prisoners are being arbitrarily accused and incarcerated and being denied due process. The Honduran state has chosen to target and criminalize the political prisoners while refusing to investigate the murders of over 330 Hondurans that were protesting the electoral fraud. 10 political prisoners incarcerated in El Pozo prison in Santa Barbara were detained in an illegal manner. No arrest warrant was presented, and house raids and detentions began as early as 3 a.m. in violation of national and international law. Judge Claudio Aguilar, who is assigned to the case of political prisoner Edwin Espinal and Raul Alvarez, has committed a series of major violations which call into question the judge's impartiality and his professionalism in his role as judge. These include failing to recuse himself from the Espinal and Alvarez case due to the fact that he previously ruled on a case involving Espinal's house raid in 2013 and attending to legal motions and filings without the legal established time frame. The conditions of detention of the political prisoners are inhumane and violate international human rights standards, and this is well documented. The Canadian Ambassador's Office sent someone in to see Edwin and the conditions of the prison, and she said that it was inhumane and below human rights standards. Lack of water, lack of food, toilets only allowed to be flushed once every 24 hours. Also, very concerning, is only 1 hour of sunlight every 2 weeks. The political prisoners do not have any human rights at all. The majority of the political prisoners have been denied access to family visitations and phone calls. Water access is limited, in many cases from 5 minutes to 2 hours a day. If you can imagine turning your water on for 5 minutes to 2 hours a day, having to bath, having to cook, etc., get your drinking water, use the toilet. And the political prisoners are limited to the very little sunlight. Under national and international law, Honduran government has a responsibility to uphold the human rights of its citizens. As Canadian and U.S. citizens, we continue to work to demand that our government suspend support to the Honduran government while it violates human rights and holds the 22 political prisoners in detention. We do not believe our tax dollars should be spent on supporting a government that is incapable of demonstrating that it upholds basic human rights standards and the rule of law. And I think it's 34 million our government gives in aid to Honduras every year. We call on the Honduran government to immediately release and drop all charges against the 22 political prisoners. As North Americans, we're monitoring the situation in individual cases very closely. We will continue to pressure international organizations and our governments to end support to the Honduran regime until our demands are met. So if we can have you sign this, we would very much appreciate it, and I will be sending a copy, actually taking it to Rodriguez myself. Another thing that that we are considering doing, in fact it's in the works, is we are planning a delegation to Honduras. We are asking anyone who would be interested in traveling to Honduras to actually visit the Canadian Ambassador's office, see the UN High Commissioner's office and talk to them, and go to the Attorney General, go to La Tolva prison. I'm going to be going, and if you are interested, please let us know. You can let us know at the back or think about it, and it would be a very short time frame, and we are considering it in June, correct, Graham? It would be led by Graham Russell at the back here, and Karen. And we, Karen and Graham, have many, many organizations that would come on board and give the delegation some very, very important information. So I thank you very, very much, everyone. Your work has done so much in such little time, but we are not going to stop our demands of the Canadian government and the Honduran government before all political prisoners are released from Honduras. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you very much for the support.
Well, thank you so much to both Karen and Janet for providing some of the granular details on the situation on the ground that really fills out the context that Tyler talked about earlier. So we are very honored and happy to have our members of parliament here. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Stanton to speak first. So Bruce, if you would like to come up.
Thanks very much, Jim. You've had to do that a few times now. That's okay. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, Heather and I are delighted to be here with you this afternoon, and what a great show of support it is from our community for Karen and the Spring family generally. It's so great to see you all here and giving them not only the moral support and encouragement in what is hard for us to understand how unimaginably difficult the situation is, as has been described here for us this afternoon. It's great to see my colleagues here from other levels of government, certainly Alex and I, your local MPs, but also Mayor French and Councillor Allen, Warden Marshall, Mayor of Tiny Township George, and others who are taking a genuine interest in this incredibly difficult situation. As has been alluded to, my part, and Alex as well, is essentially providing a means, if you will, a voice, a pathway for you to express your concerns about what is going on, and frankly putting pressure on the Government of Canada to take the right steps to put pressure on this, I mean, you can't even call it a democratic government, as Professor Shipley well described. This is a belligerent government, treats its citizens in a manner that we as Canadians, unless you've actually been there, would find very difficult to comprehend. Every chance we get to acquaint ourselves, of course, with the true situation on the ground is a helpful way for you to express your anger and dissent towards the Government of Canada. Every way that you can describe that, to put the pressure on Minister Freeland's office to ask her to do the right thing, to use each and every avenue that she can, through diplomatic channels, through every means that the Government of Canada has at its disposal to push this government in a better direction. It's pretty clear that that has not been happening to date, and it needs to change. To Karen, it's, again, difficult, unless you've been in the shoes of a Karen Spring, to know just what it takes to do that kind of work. The kind of courage, the kind of, frankly, devotion to human rights activism. Very difficult to know at a personal level what it takes to really do that. But all I do know is the world needs more Karen Springs, I would say. And Edwin Espinals as well. I mean, they are doing their part. They're on the front lines, taking personal harm in front of them, the potential for harm as has played out, to stand up for ordinary folks that just want a fighting chance to build their lives in their home country. That's all they're trying to do here, and governments need to respect that. And these awful governments like that of the Hernandez government need to be shown that. So look, let's stand with the Spring family, with Karen and Edwin and the other political prisoners in Honduras, do everything we can to continue to put pressure on. I will say as an aside that Minister Freeland has had a listening ear to this, but there needs to be a stronger voice coming to that level, so we can effect a more positive and more quick outcome here. The more we can do, the better. So let's stay together. I'm happy to hear from you. By the way, I've had some excellent letters and interventions which I've been able to pass along to the right channels. I also want to thank Paul Maurice. He's the first one who actually tipped me off to what was happening here and gave me the opening to be involved. And I've been pleased to do every little bit I can to bring voice to your interests and your thoughts and frankly pressure to get the Canadian government to do the right thing. So let's keep doing that. Great to hear this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, MP Bruce Stanton, for your remarks. And I just want to give MP Alex Nuttall a chance to come up as well and say a few things.
Thank you. It's certainly an honor to join you today, and this is one of the very few events that my son doesn't become louder than the speakers, so I'm very thankful for that as well. I just wanted to, I think that honesty is always the best policy, even ahead of expediency, and the Springs were very kind in what they said about my help to this point, but it hasn't been very much, to be honest with you. And Bruce has been doing the lion's share of the work here. I had the honor to meet with Karen and Janet this week and go through some of the perhaps strategy going forward on what we would hope to be able to do to achieve some good ends here. And it's interesting, when I was there, I said I would have to leave at 3:15 from today's meeting because I try to spend Sundays with family, and it turns out I'm going to leave at 3:15 because I'm going to meet with another group who I spoke about to them at this meeting, and that's some issues that are going on in Ethiopia and have been for a very long time. And it's amazing that the one thing that we seem to have in common every time I see one of these situations in the country abroad is the amount of aid that goes from Canadian citizens, not from the Canadian government, It's our money as citizens, from Canadian citizens to governments that are abusing their own people, killing their own people, terrorizing their own people. And that's where I think that we need to go as parliamentarians. We need to hold our government to account. It does not matter the color of the flag that government is holding. It doesn't matter whether they're NDP, Conservative, or Liberal. The reality is that we need to hold our government to account to say our dollars should not be going to a government that is abusing its own citizens. It is the complete opposite of what those dollars are meant for. The dollars that we give in aid are meant to help countries move forward, help them, whether it's in microfinancing, to spur entrepreneurship, or it's just feeding people, like in Ethiopia, where you have 8 million people who are starving. These are the purposes of the money, yet it seems to be that we're propping up regimes that are abusing people, and it's not just in Honduras, it's around the world. So I think that one of the things that we talked about on Wednesday was being able to actually bring that up in Parliament and say, you know what, folks, yes, Edwin is not a Canadian citizen, and that makes it an incredibly complex situation for us, because we have Canadian citizens around the world who are in prison, and that's where the Foreign Affairs puts the lion's share of their efforts. However, why are we spending close to 40, I think it was 37 million a year, propping up the government that is hurting its own people? And I can tell you that money talks, and if the situation which is being described here today in terms of companies having such an impact on what's happening in their democracy, the core of that is money. And so if money is the major element here, then let's use that element against them and say, you know what, we're going to cut off our foreign aid until you respect human beings, until you respect their rights. We have such tiny fights here for rights, like we fight over cell phone rights and just absolute ridiculous things in the main of society. These people are literally fighting for the right to breathe, right to eat, the right to find a good life where they are. So we need to use whatever assets we have at our disposal to encourage a free and democratic society, and the biggest asset we have right now is the foreign aid that we give them. So that's what I'll be encouraging. I know Bruce and others will be as well. If you're not from here, please reach out to your MP, as was stated. It is so incredibly important. And one last thing, it can change, and it can change like that. When we were originally working on the issue with Ethiopia, I eventually got the ambassador of Ethiopia just randomly called my cell phone, and an office line as well, that was put through to my cell phone, begging for a meeting. And that means that there's been some sort of shift, or they've got pressure from the Canadian government to say, hold on, we got to figure this out. They did actually let some of the political prisoners out. There's ebbs and flows to these regimes. They, we let 3 out, even though we have 200 in prison, to try to show that we're doing something good. But the more we can push in the right direction, the better. So it can flip on a dime, and the pressure you're putting on is incredibly important to that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, MP Alex Nuttall. Can we now actually have Deputy Mayor Don Allen come up and speak to us?
Thank you very much. And thank you for all attending, and thank you for the wonderful presentations. Very informative. I think what's important here is, as we have said, is to find out the reason why the government has taken its position. And an obvious answer is big money. We've heard about the companies that are there, and sometimes government positions follow the money. But I would like to know why the different governments have taken the positions since back in 2009 to support the governments and not support human rights. This current government has taken a different position in its relations with China, and there's lots of big money there, but they know that the human rights are not being followed in China, but they haven't been able to make a difference there. But I think if we keep writing and expressing our opinions with respect to the dealing of human rights and how this is not being done here, then that will put pressure on the governments. And I thank Aware and I thank others in this room who have worked hard to keep us informed. And I think it's important to keep us informed with each of these meetings that happen so that we can continue to write specific letters, specific recommendations of what is needed here with the most recent facts that we have. So I thank you for all your interest, and please keep the information coming, because I think it's through it's these letters that are drafted for us, but also through repeated writing and follow-up that the government is going to see that people do care and they need to reconsider their thoughts and policies in this matter. Thank you.
Okay, so we're just about ready to get to the Q&A. Our Mayor, Bill French, is just going to come up and say a few remarks after he's heard some of the speakers speak, since he was the first to welcome us here today.
Thank you. Those are very, very effective kind of information pieces, and that's what we need. We need real information. You know, when we ask the question, unfortunately, it's very, very simple. It's all about money. And, you know, and of course, on both sides. You know, we always talk about the economic benefit and creating jobs and that. But I think everybody in this room also believes in that concept of people, planet, and profit. But somehow that profit, that economic driver seems to get ahead of the game, and we seem to put a blind eye to a lot of other things. And I'm speaking from the position of being a great capitalist during my career. But the reality is things have changed in the last 30 or 40 years as we went into globalization. We do put a blind eye to working conditions and human rights in far-off nations that we're dealing with. And it is ironic with the instant information we have nowadays through social media, how much of it gets lost in the shuffle. Like, except for, I think Fox News is the only one that's talking about I think is what, 1,000 Hondurans are making their way north, but you don't hear about it. Well, they must be doing it for some reason. I'm sure Janet or Karen could tell us why. So, you know, we give a lot of money, and it's kind of interesting. We're going to give $40 million to Honduras for human rights and assisting the social well-being. So I think we're all responsible. We seem to have a lot of hashtags out there, and we seem to really focus on our own personal well-being sometimes, and maybe we should create a new one, hashtag what's in it for me, because that seems to be what's happening with our governments at the present time. And I think we do have to lean on our governments. I really thank kind of everyone that's here. I definitely thank the presenters. They've certainly gave us good, solid information. And we all have to take part in this. My wife reminded me of driving up here 40 years ago. A priest friend of ours was on his it's not sabbatical year, but before he obviously entered the priesthood. And he went to India and worked with Mother Teresa and also the Philippines. And of course, in the Philippines, he was being involved with social activism, much like kind of Karen is. And the government there actually wanted to assassinate him. And the only reason he survived is he had a driver that was a lot better than the army militia that were chasing him with machine guns. So the reality is this happens around the world, and we're all responsible for it. I can tell you, if you talk to our farmers, you know, some of their livelihood has been kind of compressed somewhat because of us doing these foreign trade deals, bringing things in that we could grow here. And I do want to throw out an acknowledgement to both Colin Elliott and to Paul Maurice. They actually tabled a resolution at the Simcoe County Federation of Agriculture's meeting the other night in support of the efforts that are here today. So I do want to congratulate them and also recognize Connie Brown. She's here from the Simcoe County Federation of Agriculture. And I saw our councillor from Ward 2, Perry Ritchie, has arrived. And so we thank everybody that's been here. And this was really good information, but let's take it with us. Let's not just leave here and a few hours from now or a few days say, well, that was interesting, but there's not much I can do. You're the change makers because you came here. So make change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bill French. So we are going to open this up to Q&A. I do want to make one announcement. Unfortunately, Jeff Montague is unable to have spoken with us today. He was going to be one of our key speakers, but he's unfortunately at a hospital with his daughter and can't attend. She will be fine, but does require some stitches, unfortunately. So he does send his apologies. But you know, Jeff is the former chief of Mosley First Nations, and we know in this area we have a rich history of farmers, community members, First Nations, and just people who are defending human rights and basic due process coming together in our communities. And it's really about finding those shared values that we have in this community and thinking about the shared values we have with people in Honduras and what they're struggling for there. So I do want to open this up now to Q&A. And what I always say is that, you know, sometimes the most fundamental or basic questions are actually some of the best ones. So if you're thinking, I don't know if I should be asking this question, I really encourage you to ask any question. It really does help you get discussion going, and sometimes those most basic questions are some of the most interesting ones to answer. So does anyone have any questions? We have, okay, bingo, over here.
Hi, my name is Irene Bell. I'm from Wasaga Beach. I wondered if Professor Shipley or maybe Karen would comment on the corporate aspect that's going on in Honduras right now. It's my understanding that Gildan, which is a huge manufacturing textile business previously from Montreal, has one of the worst employee human rights records in the country down there in terms of how they treat their employees. And I'm sure if we all look at the label that's on our t-shirt or our shirt, you're going to see Gildan is there. So I'm wondering if that's one of the levers we could use. There's also, I'm not sure about this, but Goldcore might have been, which is a Canadian mining company there, might have been implicated in the assassination of Berta Cáceres, who was the leading environmentalist in the country, and who was assassinated by the government, and who was recognized internationally. There's also the case of the Garifuna, who are an indigenous people on the east coast of Honduras, who are being evicted from their lands by Canadian interests who want to develop it as a tourist area. So I wonder if you could comment on what leverage we could use in these situations.
Did you want to come up to the front here?
Let's just do that to all of those corporations over and over again. I think the question answered itself. I mean, thank you for all of that information, all of which was spot on, absolutely accurate. You know, I guess the only detail that I would add would just be to sort of flesh that out. Canada has, the last time I checked, over $600 million invested in different companies invested in the country. Gildan, whom you mentioned, is the largest private sector employer in the country. Of all of Honduras, Gildan is the largest private sector employer. So they employ a huge number of Hondurans. The conditions, as you rightly pointed out, are deplorable. You know, Karen and I, certainly Karen more than me, have sat in meetings with people who work in those factories, who describe what it's like to work for those companies. One example I'll give you of many is that when workers try to get together to form a union to try to defend their interests, to be allowed to have more bathroom breaks, which is an issue, shorter shifts, access to proper doctors, all sorts of things that they are fighting for, the company will often hire, and I don't have a better word for it, thugs, essentially. People who are men who are connected to criminal organizations, who have violent reputations, who've been in and out of prison, whom everyone knows would be willing to assassinate someone if it came to it. And the company, Gildan, has actually hired those individuals as private security to intimidate people trying to defend themselves at work. And that is all documented. There's been several large studies by the Fair Labor Association on all of that. So yeah, that's one example. We can talk about the mines, Barrick Gold, Goldcorp. These are both. Canada is the largest investor in mining in Honduras as well. Chile is second, but Canada is by far the largest. You mentioned the tourist industry. That's an area where there's a huge amount of money invested. Canadian companies that are building retirement villages, resort hotels. There's a new cruise port that has been built all on indigenous Garifuna territory. So I guess to answer the question, how can we use that as leverage? Well, I certainly think that we need to speak to the Canadian government about what those corporations are doing. We need to ask the Canadian government why they consistently give those corporations awards for corporate social responsibility. This is something that Gildan has won several awards for corporate social responsibility, despite being an absolutely horrendous, probably one of the worst examples of corporate behavior. So I think exposing those links is very important. I also think that connecting Canadian policy in Honduras to those corporations is very important. And everyone has spoken about this very eloquently, following the money. I certainly don't think that Canadian politicians are out there trying to hurt Hondurans. I don't think it's willfully malicious what Canada is doing. I think it's a matter of the Canadian government simply saying the easiest thing to do here is to support what Gildan wants, to support what Goldcorp wants. They're the ones who are in our ear. They're the ones who are telling us what Honduras needs. We have to be the other voice so that we can outshout Gildan and Goldcorp. I hope that answers the question, Karen. If you have anything to add, please do. It's a wonderful question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Any other questions at all? And it can be about anything. Yeah, at the back. Hi.
Thank you, everyone. I'll stand back from it. Anyway, my name is Brian. I just have a simple question for the Spring family and the committee. Has the Amnesty International group approached you, or have you approached it? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for the question about Amnesty International.
So Amnesty has very different chapters around the world, but so there's an Amnesty Canada, and I know there's little Amnesty groups all over. There's one in Orillia, there's one in Midland, and there's one based in Ottawa, so Amnesty Canada is based in Ottawa. They are very interested in the political prisoners in Edwin's case, but they're waiting on Amnesty International to take on the case, and they're going through their internal protocols. But I think it's really important to note that Amnesty International went into the prison to visit Edwin because of all of the pressure that people are sort of putting on Amnesty International as well. And Amnesty sent several letters, private letters, to the Honduran government saying, why are you not following due process? Why are you violating the law? And so they will likely be putting out something very shortly. But I do think that it's another way people can get involved is also contacting Amnesty too and saying, when is your decision going to be made? And when are you going to come out publicly and speak about political prisoners? But yes, Amnesty's actually been quite supportive, and they are on it and shown a lot of interest in taking on Edwin and the political prisoners' cases.
Great. Thank you for that question. Do we have any other questions for any of the speakers or guests, or to the room? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't need that. I'll learn on the third time back. So. Is there a list of the companies that are doing business down in Honduras that we could get a hold of?
That's a good question. So the question was, is there a list of all of the different companies in Honduras that we can get a hold of as a sort of an action item?
If I can do a list right now, but if people want to, if they're looking for more information, I recommend checking out the Simcoe County Honduran Rights Monitor website, which is the local website that's following Honduras and issues in Honduras, and we will post a list on our website. Or looking at rightsaction.org. The Graham Russell in the back standing up. He's done a lot of putting out information about Canada's, the companies in Honduras. Some, just to say now, I mean, the woman that got up to speak knew them very well. Goldcorp, mining company based in Vancouver, Gildan out of Montreal. There are several tourist development companies, including one that is paying an advertisement out in Angus, promoting stolen Indigenous land and asking people to buy cheap vacation land to build their vacation homes, and that's sort of another really local issue. They're stealing land in Honduras and then putting up billboards in our communities, selling it to us like it's this legitimate business. And the actual company, that company's name is Enjoy. There's another one called Life Vision Developments, and these are all companies that are basically selling this land to Canadians. There's also some energy companies. Blue Energy is one. There's several, but we will post a list for people that want to get in touch with these companies. And I think we need to get in touch with the government and say, why is the government supporting these companies' interests over human rights? And I think we need to always bring it back to, how our government is creating conditions for these companies in Honduras while they're murdering their citizens and committing gross human rights violations.
And I think that the handout that you got on the way in has that website link, right, for the Simcoe County Human Rights Monitor. So if you have the handout, that's on there. If you didn't get a handout, there might be a few more at the back on your way out. Make sure you get one of those handouts that talks to the links where you can get that more information. So it's very important to get informed. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I don't have so much of a question. I just have a presentation. I'm Anita Johnson-Ford. I'm the president of the Berrien District Labour Council. At our last Labour Council meeting, we passed a motion to donate $500 to Rights Action. We also tabled a motion to, under the Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor resolution, to have this, it was addressed, tabled at our last meeting, but we will vote on it on the next meeting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that donation. We're actually, and for passing the resolution, that's actually a couple of the actions that we're asking people to take today. One is that the resolutions, we're asking anyone that's involved in any organizations to take a resolution and to speak to their organization or their unions about the resolution. And so thank you so much. I think you might be one of the first. And with the donations, we're also on the sheet that you got when you came in the door. We are asking for donations as well, and some of the money, most of the money will go to supporting families of the political prisoners. Many of the people that are in jail are very, very poor, and so they don't have the ability to just pay for a bus ticket to go to the prison, to travel to see their loved one in prison, and so we're using that money to support them, and then also cover some of the costs that the Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor has as well. But thank you very much for that donation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so and I see refreshments coming out, so we do have time for one or two more questions, and then I'm not going to get in between you and the refreshments. So.
I'm just wondering too, because social media is such a powerful way to spread a message too, and if a lot of people on here were able to access social media, is there any social media hashtags, campaigns, or anything that we're using right now? And if not, is there something that could be put on as a sample on the website as well that we could use to spread the word that way as well?
Yep, actually the Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor has a website. It's on the page that we gave out. They also have a Facebook page and a Twitter as well. And we also, there's one specific for Edwin as well, which is posted on the website. I keep encouraging people to go back to the Simcoe County Honduras Rights Monitor website, and all the hashtags and Twitter and Facebook stuff is on there. But yes, it is a very important tool, and you can actually use it to send messages directly to the government, the ambassador, Freeland's office, or the Honduran president as well.
Probably that was a good time to remind people that there are action letters at the back table right there. So before you leave today, you can sign a letter today, and that will be sent off to your members of parliament and the Canadian authorities that are involved in this case to put some pressure on them. I think that was a theme we heard both from our speakers as well as our politicians, that these letters actually do make a big difference. As you do, please take the time to write those letters. They're making a difference both here in Canada, but also in terms of sending international organizations into the prisons to make sure that the situation there is monitored. So we have another comment. That looks like some spring water.
Okay, this is flow water that it was blessed on April 6, 2018, from Springwater, Ontario, Canada, from the Aboriginal community in our neighborhood. And I would just like to read the purpose of this blessed spirit water. This is the water from Alston Aquifer, known locally as the purest water in the world. The water in this container has been tested to be purer than the cleanest layers of Arctic glacial ice. In the past year, this water has been sent to Indigenous peoples in over 4 different countries: South Africa, India, Nepal, and China, and used for ceremony by Indigenous peoples, including various sites in North America. On Friday, April 6, 2018, this water was drawn from the flow in Elmvale, and it has been blessed and prayed for. It was prayed for specifically for Edwin, all political prisoners, for the Spring family, and for Indigenous peoples in the Honduras. All over the world, Indigenous people are standing up for their lands, waters, and their basic human rights. This is the commonality that all Indigenous people share. We have been victims of land, water, and human rights exploitation in the name of trade and economy by colonialized forces. Our sacred sites have been and continue to be desecrated all over the earth. Many of these sites being older than countries themselves. One of the things that Indigenous people also share is our collective strength. We still have the original bundles that the Creator gave us, despite efforts to take our language, culture, and connection to the land. We still have everything in its purity, and we have the strength of our ancestors behind us. We have been in our lands and territories for tens of thousands of years, and we will continue to be here even longer than that. It is important that this water go to the Honduras, and we will find a way to get it there. It will be taken to the prisons where people are struggling to survive. It will be taken to the sacred sites and rivers, especially in places where people are standing up for the land, water, and basic human rights. Water is life, and this is what connects all of us. When we stand up for human rights, and we are standing up for the Creator we've given right to life, not just for ourselves, but for all. Through this water, all people draw our strength. Take this water, hold it close to your heart, and pray with it for the people of the Honduras. The more prayers this water holds, the stronger this movement will be. Through this process, we invoke the strength of our ancestors, the strength of the land, and the strength of the Creator for the highest possible outcome and the highest possible healing. We also invoke a sacred bond between Indigenous nations that is built on love and support. All people can pray with this water, regardless of ancestry, because all people are children of the Creator, and together we can preserve through all odds. And that was on Friday. So I would just like you to know that the water in Spring Water, we fight for its cleanliness. And there is a fight going on. There is an event on the 14th, and you can talk to Anne. Anne, where are you?
Who is that statement written by?
It's written by Vicky Minogue, and yeah. Vicky Minogue is First Nations in the neighborhood. And Anne is over there at the doorway, and she's with the organizations to defend the water in Waverly Uplands. And there's an event next Saturday for that, so there's a connection.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have one last question or any other? Yeah.
I'm Erica Engel from Collingwood Today. You were mentioning the $34 million annual aid that the Canadian government provides to Honduras. Does that go directly to the Honduras government, or is that including NGOs as well? Do you know?
What I understand is that the majority of it goes to the Canadian government, or sorry, the Honduran government. So it would go to institutions like the Public Prosecutor's Office that are laying the charges against the political prisoners, training the police, military, probably on human rights issues that they don't respect. So yeah, there would be a bunch of institutions, but the majority to the Honduran government.
Thank you for your question.
Hi, I just wanted to ask the question, during all of these organizations to try and help the political prisoners, do you and your family suffer any intimidation tactics here in Canada due to the work that you're trying to do?
Thanks for that question.
So, I guess I can speak for myself. Over the years, I've worked in Honduras and supporting Edwin and supporting people, human rights defenders. I have faced persecution for what I do. Edwin has a very long history of persecution against him, and his family does too. And because of that, and because of the persecution in the country against the families of the political prisoners as well, including my own and Edwin's family, I think that it's really important that people here speak up for people, speak up for the political prisoners in Honduras, because in so many ways that fear silences them and makes them too scared to do that. And so myself, working with Edwin's family obviously is very fearful that because of his work and because of the persecution against him, that something will happen to them as well. And so yes, there's been a bunch of incidences, but I think that the more we can talk about it up here, and the more we raise an issue about it up here, the more likely that the Honduran government will think twice about going after the family members of the political prisoners and Edwin's family.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Hi.
Just very quickly for you, Karen, how's Edwin doing? When's the last time you spoke to him?
So the last time I spoke to Edwin was Thursday morning. There was an uprising in the prison where he's being held because there were several prisoners that were protesting the conditions inside the jail. So I haven't heard from him since. We know that the military went into the prison and it was occupied by hundreds of military forces. So we don't really know. I haven't heard from him, so I don't really know. But and then the phone system has been cut off inside the prison, so he hasn't called me. But his condition is that he has lost a lot of weight. He doesn't get enough food. We've sort of already talked a little bit about the conditions, but they're pretty horrific, and it's kind of across the board for all of the political prisoners. But he knows that we're meeting here today. And he would be really happy and thankful for everyone being here. And all of this and the photos and the comments from this meeting today will be shared with all of the families in Honduras of the political prisoners, so they know that they have support from a community far away in Canada.
So I think we're going to wrap up unless there's any other comments. And it is easy, I think, to feel a little bit of despair in these moments. And we think of Honduras as being far away. We hear of military coups and whatnot. But what I see in this room is a tremendous amount of hope. What I see is that people have come together on this issue as a first step, and there's lots of steps we can be taking in any organization, our faith organizations, our unions, our community groups, all of the different organizations that we're part of, as well as ourselves, writing those letters and getting more informed. And the work that we're doing, we've heard from all our politicians, is already having an impact on the Canadian government. It's already having an impact on international organizations that are putting an international spotlight on that prison where Edwin and so many other political prisoners are. So I'm glad that we're here today, and let's have some refreshments and celebrate the work we're doing and the work we're going to do from here on in today. Thank you very much for coming in. Check. Test.
Thank you.